Hi students, welcome to Vidyanagar online classes. In our last class, we have discussed about the friction and its causes. Now, in this class, we are going to discuss the factors affecting friction. What are the factors which affect friction? So, the first factor which affects the friction is smoothness of the surfaces in contact. And the second factor which affects friction is force with which the two surfaces are pressed together. Okay, so these are the two factors which affect the friction. So first of all, let us discuss the first factor in detail. What is the first factor? Smoothness of the surfaces in contact. As you all know, friction is caused by the irregularities between the two surfaces in contact. Okay, so if I ask you, in which case the friction is more, when the surface is rough or when the surface is smooth? In which case the friction is more? Yes, when the surface is rough, the friction will be more. And when the surface is smooth, the friction will be less. That means as the smoothness increases, the friction decreases. Okay? If you do not believe me, I can give you an example. Look here. Suppose this is the smooth road. This is the smooth road. Okay? And you want to drive the car on this smooth road. And in the second case, this is the rough road. Okay? Rough road means there are a lot of rocks, stones and uneven ups and downs. This is rough road. And you also want to drive the car on this rough road. So, in which case you need to apply more force to drive the car? In this case or in this case? Yes, in the second case, when the road is rough, you need to apply more force. Why? Because in this case, the friction is more. The force that opposes the motion is more here. Why? Because of rocks, stones and uneven ups and downs, friction is more here. So that is why you need to apply more force to move the car. But in the first case, when the road is smooth, you do not need to apply much force. Okay? Because the friction is less here. Okay? So from this example, we can clearly say that as the smoothness increases, the friction decreases. And when the roughness increases, the friction increases. So what is the first factor that affects friction? Yes, the first factor is smoothness of the surfaces in contact. Understood? Now we are going to discuss the second factor which affects the friction. What is the second factor? Force with which the two surfaces are pressed together. I will explain you this factor with the help of an example. Suppose there are two cases. In the first case, I ask you to drag a mat. You know mat? Yes. I ask you to drag the mat when no one is sitting on it. And in the second case, again I ask you to drag a mat, but at this time a person is sitting on it. So in which case you will find more difficult to drag a mat? Yes. In the second case, when a person is sitting on the mat, you will find more difficult to drag a mat. Why? Because in the second case, the force with which the two surfaces are pressed is harder. What are the two surfaces here? The surface of the mat and the surface on which the mat is kept. So the force with which these two surfaces are pressed is harder. That is why the friction will be more there and you will find more difficulty to drag the mat when a person is sitting on it. Okay? So what is the second factor? Force with which the two surfaces are pressed together. If the force with which the two surfaces are pressed is harder, the friction will be more. Okay? So what are the two factors which affect the friction? The first factor is smoothness of the surfaces in contact. That means if the smoothness increases, friction decreases. And if the roughness increases, friction also increases. And what is the second factor? Second factor is force with which the two surfaces are pressed together. That means if the force with which the two surfaces are pressed is harder, the friction will also be more. Okay, so these are the two factors which affect friction. I hope you understand. Now we are going to discuss the types of friction, that is static friction and sliding friction. Look here. Suppose this is a box. Okay, this is a box which is at rest. This box is at rest. Now we want to move this box. Then we need to apply some force. Why we need to apply force? Because there is a frictional force that keeps this box at rest. And that frictional force is known as static friction. Okay. So what is static friction? Static friction is a frictional force experienced when we try to move the stationary object on the surface. Okay. Or the force experienced to overcome friction at the instant when an object starts moving from rest is a measure of static friction. Okay. The force experienced to overcome friction at an instant when an object starts moving from rest is a measure of static friction. Understood? Now suppose that this box is already in motion. Okay, this box is already in motion. That is, this box is sliding over the surface on which it is kept. Okay, then also there is a friction acting between the two surfaces which are in sliding contact, and that friction is known as sliding friction. Okay, or we can say that the force required to keep the object moving with the same speed is a measure of sliding friction. Okay, the force required to keep the object moving with same speed is a measure of sliding friction. Understood? Now always remember one thing, that sliding friction is slightly smaller than static friction. Okay, sliding friction is slightly smaller than static friction. Why? Because as we all know that friction is caused by the interlocking of the irregularities. Okay, but during sliding, contact points do not get enough time to interlock properly. That is why sliding friction is slightly smaller than static friction. Okay, understood? So what are the topics we have discussed today? First of all, we discussed about the factors that affect the friction. Then we discussed about the types of friction, that is sliding friction and static friction. So that's all in today's class. We will meet soon in the next video. Thank you.